In anticipation for the new Fist of the North Star game by the Yakuza developers at Sega, I've been digging into the series' history. And more specifically, I've been looking at the other games released as part of the series over the years. You've got your typical 2D brawlers, fighters, visual novels, and even Dynasty Warriors style ant squashing simulators. But I stumbled onto what could possibly be the perfect Fist of the North Star game called Legend of the Survivor for the original PlayStation. It came out in the year 2000, and despite the age of the hardware it was made for, its graphics and art style are incredibly good looking and faithful to the series. This was actually the first fully 3D Fist of the North Star game, and everything about it is very true to the series, with its own incredibly charming recreation of the TV anime series opening. It's basically like a greatest hits of the series, beginning with Kenshiro wandering through the desert and making its way all the way to the final confrontation with Rao. So it's really only the good stuff of the series, and even then it's only the good stuff of the good stuff, with a lot of the pointless bits cut out. You'll get to see all of your favorite moments and play through the best fights, all redone in this simple but endearing style. Reading the manga, it really felt like it was being written on the fly. You could just see their thought process from page to page as they tried to figure out where to go next. They actually smooth out the narrative a bit more here. For example, there's this part early on where a kid brings them to his village to fix their blocked up well so they can get water. Instead of just doing it, they go to bed and the kid sneaks off to go steal water from another village with a well so he can give it to the old lady taking care of them. He's killed in the process, which inspires Kenshiro to punch the well so hard it makes water again. This seemed like a forced moment since it doesn't make sense that Kenshiro wouldn't just do what he came to the village to do. And it also doesn't make sense that the kid would feel so driven to steal water from another village when he had a guy there specifically to fix his. In the game, they show up to the village, Kenshiro punches the well, and they get water, so the kid doesn't have to die. It's just little stuff like that that adds up to make a more consistent narrative overall. This game came out about 13 years after the original anime aired, but it still managed to bring back a ton of voice actors from that adaptation. So really, this is more of a great throwback for fans than it is a timely video game tie-in to cash in on a popular brand. Akira Kamiya is probably the best voice Kenshiro has had, and this is the final time Rei's voice actor Kaneto Shiozawa voiced his character, since he unfortunately passed away before the game's release. This has to be my favorite portrayal of this world. I get that it's supposed to be the apocalypse and all, but the color palettes in some adaptations are just way too drab. This game is pretty colorful, while still maintaining the look and atmosphere of a destroyed world. I really love the way the characters look here. They all have a ton of personality, and the Hokuto Shinken explosion effects also look great on them. One of the problems I have with the manga, at least in the early parts, is that Kenshiro is just so unstoppably powerful that there isn't any chance that he'll lose. I mean, come on, the entire premise of the series is that Kenshiro has a perfect, invincible fighting style that no one can defeat. Even though he was supposed to be the sole inheritor of the style, they even had to create new characters who conveniently also used it, since that was the only way they could justify someone standing up to him. So just by being a game where you can lose battles due to your own actions, the events of the story hold a lot more weight and get you more invested. Sure, the story is that Kenshiro is godlike, but it's actually up to you to live up to that standard. I definitely enjoyed the earlier stuff more than the manga for the sole fact that these enemies could defeat me if I wasn't trying hard enough. Kenshiro felt like he was actually overcoming things, not just yawning and then blowing their head off with a single touch. Combat itself is presented in a very arcadey manner. You don't run around levels or anything like that, it's very linear and you just take part in the action. You get a nice cutscene which sets things up, and then you transition into a battle area where you defeat your enemies, and then the next cutscene begins. I'd describe the combat system as having a less is more mentality behind its design. All of the buttons you have to work with are the D-pad to move, and square, X, and circle. Square does light attacks, X does heavy attacks, and circle lets you jump. But with those few buttons, you can do a lot. Just like in Yakuza, a combo of light attacks can be ended with a heavy attack, in this game being a satisfying roundhouse kick. Then you can press both buttons together to do a stronger attack. Some moves you pull off even change depending on whether or not you're moving. So if you're standing still and press square and X, you'll do a flurry of kicks, but if you're holding a direction, you'll do a Bruce Lee style punch with some decent range. This is similar to how DMC has different moves depending on directional inputs when you're locked on, but this game doesn't have a lock on, so it makes do with what it can. Thankfully that doesn't get annoying though, since the camera is always fixed in a nice position no matter what. Plus, the environments are usually small and simple enough that there's nowhere for enemies to hide off screen. Like I said before, you also have a jump button which lets you do unique aerial moves with square, X, and both at the same time. You may be asking, what are your defensive options? Well, holding square lets you block attacks, but you're punished for blocking too much by a small bar under your health bar that builds up the more you block. Once that fills up, your guard will break and you'll be left dazed and open for attacks for a few seconds. Aside from that, double tapping the D-pad lets you perform a dash that you can use to dodge attacks. After you dash, you can continue to sprint, which is a lot faster than Kenshiro's basic fighting stride. Then while you're moving quickly, you can perform even more unique moves with each of the buttons. A running punch, a dive kick, and even a soaring leap through the sky that you can use to get behind enemies. Moves like this really make you feel like you're playing as Kenshiro, and that's one of my biggest compliments. Fist of the North Star was a battle manga based around a guy's skilled fighting technique, and this feels way more in line with how the fights played out in the series than the Dynasty Warriors games. It was never really about a guy who could take on an army of 1,000 guys just because he could punch really fast, despite how ridiculous later adaptations and sequels would become. Usually the big villain of an arc would just challenge Kenshiro directly because they were so prideful that they didn't think they could lose. The game obviously follows this, meaning it's very boss fight heavy, which is good since it keeps things interesting by putting you against foes with unique fighting styles. All of your enemies make sure to blow up instead of just falling over dead. But what's interesting is how you can trigger explosive special moves. Enemies will flash when they're about to attack, which is a nice telegraph so you know when to dodge or block, but it also serves as a clever dual purpose of telling you when you can attack to trigger a special move. Once you initiate one of these, you'll need to complete a time-sensitive QuickTime event, and if you succeed, you deal a ton of damage. With the resulting shockwave, you'll knock around the other enemies in the environment, and even regain a bit of health. Apparently the game has 200 unique death cries for these kills, which I have to say is exactly how I'd expect a Fist of the North Star game to use the added space of a CD. Battles thankfully never get tiring since they're usually short and sweet. You get in, knock some guys around, watch them explode, and get out. With no leveling up, no new moves to learn, or anything like that to keep combat evolving, I'd say this was a good choice. Better to keep you wanting more of a simple system than having you grow bored by making you do the same thing for too long. It does switch things up when it can though. Both Toki and Rei are playable during their fights in the story. These little one-off events go a long way to keep things fresh, and it's just really cool to experience the unique ways these guys fight. During one scene, you get to choose whether you want to play as Rei or Kenshiro, and then you have to fight the other one as the boss of that section. And of course I'm gonna take the opportunity to kick Kenshiro's ass as Rei. You can even do the same with a friend in the versus mode the game has. Yeah, there's actually a 2-player versus mode that lets you challenge another player with 14 different characters from the story, all with unique moves. Remember when every game would have a mode like this just for the hell of it? This is an awesome bonus, and I'm finally able to defeat every other character in the series as Jagi, the true successor of Hokuto Shinken. To wrap things up, this is a fantastic bit of fan service. I'd absolutely suggest this if you enjoyed the manga or anime and want to re-experience the story in a condensed but charmingly simplistic form. It's sort of like a best of both worlds between the manga and anime, with its own improvements to make for a better game. Sure, it was only released in Japan, but if you're gonna play this game, you should already know everything that's happening in the story anyway. And the gameplay is simple enough that if you've watched this video, you'll know everything you need to know to make it to the end just fine. Get out there and read the manga if you haven't and play this game. Then you'll be ready for the Yakuza team's take on the series with Hokuto ga Gotoku, aka Like a North Star. It looks like it's gonna be its own thing, almost like a weird remix of the events of the series, all placed into one city with a Yakuza flair. I know it's weird to say because they're not even made by the same company, but it almost looks like a sequel to this game. I really look forward to seeing how the devs behind Yakuza 0 can apply their skills to create an even better combat system than this, because it seems to be following the same design philosophy. But enough of what awaits us, this game actually exists currently, so go play it and have fun, guys.
Ciao.